You are in Lahore, you told me, but you are not under house arrest, are you?
Well, it's not house arrest, but there's police outside my house which checks people who come in and go out. And basically, apart from lawyers and few people, um, uh, if uh, if any workers come in, they are picked up, they're put inside jail. If they think there's anyone, who are my supporters or my members of parliament, then they are picked up. So therefore, only lawyers come to see me,
Mm-hmm.
and very few close people are allowed. Otherwise, I'm quite isolated here.
Understand. Do you expect to remain free, if we can call this free, or do you expect to be arrested in the near future?
Oh, I expect to be arrested. There are over 170 cases, and every day there's some new case that they come up with. Bear in mind that at the age of 70, I didn't have one criminal case. And in the last few months, I have over 170 and growing. I mean, the number is increasing. So I expect that they will arrest me because they are determined that I should be in jail before the elections.
Mm-hmm.
Because, the whole idea is that I should not be competing in the elections because they all know from the opinion polls, from all the surveys, that this party will win the elections uh, in a landslide. And that's why they are determined that I should not be able to campaign and I should be in jail.
Mm-hmm. When you say they, can you name the people or the organizations?
Well, it's the people in power. The power. They are the 12 parties coalition government, but they are backed by the establishment, the military establishment.
Mhm. The last time you were arrested, there was civil unrest, basically. Your supporters were attacking the general headquarters. Do you think this would happen again if you are arrested?
Well, the last time what happened was that they illegally abducted me. It wasn't an arrest because as the Supreme Court ruled, it was illegal. It was
Hmm.
unlawful, my arrest. So that's why I was released. But and so the way they arrested me, abducted me. I mean, they beat up. It was a commando action. Why couldn't the police have come in and arrested me? Why did they need commandos? Then they beat up everyone. They beat up the lawyers. I was sitting inside they beat up the staff of the High Court.
Hmm.
And the way they took me as some sort of a terrorist, that was what caused a big reaction. But we claim that the arson that took place, the burning of a few buildings, that had nothing to do with us.
Hmm.
We believe that it was all a plan. They were few because for 27 years, my party has never been involved in arson or in this sort of violence. In
Hmm.
fact, when I was shot, when 11 of my other people had bullet wounds, even then there was no violence. There was demonstrations, but there was no violence. So we believe that this was planned to dismantle our party. This was a pre-planned thing. That the way they abducted me, they knew there would be a reaction, and they had planned to sort of set fire to certain buildings and then use it to do the biggest crackdown in our history. 10,000 of my workers in 48 hours were put into jail. So that couldn't have been done unless it was planned before. You can't
Hmm.
just arrest 10,000 people unless you already had the addresses and numbers and people. So it was all a planned operation.
Hmm. Will the
All
elections be held in October?
They will only be held in October if they think that my party cannot compete, that it's weakened enough that that it cannot compete in the elections. That's the only way they will hold the elections, because they will not take a chance. The people, the establishment who removed me, does not want to see me back in power. So they will do everything to ensure that elections will only be held when they think that we are no longer able to win the elections.
Hmm. In case you cannot participate in the elections or your party cannot participate, What will you call for then?
No, I think, it's not possible for them to ban the party. I mean, they are definitely going to put me in jail, but they're not going to ban the party. So I feel that in that time, uh, uh, unless they rig the elections, to the point that they make whole the exercise a joke, unless they sort of make a farce of the elections, uh, it will be impossible for them to stop our party from winning, even if I'm in jail.
Mhm. So you think that the elections, if they're held, then your party will win? Is that what you say?
Yes, I think that they will not be able to stop the party from winning.
Mhm.
Because, just from the opinion polls, you can see that the party is way, way ahead of all the parties. And if you go by the last few months by-elections that took place in Pakistan, out of 37 by-elections, my party swept 30 of them.
Mhm.
And this is despite the whole establishment and the government supporting the 12-party coalition. Even
Mhm.
then, we won 30 out of 37.
Mhm. You said recently that when you were in power, you could not bring the powerful under the law. I suppose you meant the military establishment. Um, you were also, in a way, you were also in the beginning relying on the military establishment.
Well,
Um,
look,
was
let,
it necessary or was it a mistake?
let me explain. The military has been in power in Pakistan directly or indirectly for 75 years. Pakistan started as a security state. We had immediately after independence, we had a conflict with India in 1948. And so the reliance on military was always, uh, it was ingrained in our society that, we could not go without the military. So the military, there were three martial laws, direct control of the government. And then, the rest of the time, indirectly, they were still, uh, very powerful. So when I came to power in 2018, I didn't get the help of the military, but they didn't oppose me.
Mhm.
They weren't against me. Right now, the military establishment is actually working to undermine me. But in 2018 elections, they didn't oppose me. We won the elections free and fair. And that is reflected since then, since being out of power, despite the military helping all these 12-party coalitions, we still have won 30 out of 37 elections, by elections. So therefore, in a sense, the army didn't oppose me. But next question is, the role of the military. I think as time has passed, the countries the country must evolve, and it must evolve to a point where you cannot have a situation where an elected prime minister has the responsibility to run the country, and yet he doesn't have the authority. The authority and responsibility in any management system must be in one place. If you separate the two, it's not possible. So in my case, I as long as there was no, whatever I was doing, the army was not concerned. In fact, it went very well, and the army actually helped me in certain areas. In the COVID-19, they provided us great logistics, and we were very successful in dealing with it. But when I wanted to bring the powerful under the law, it's not just that some of the military personnel think they are above law. It is also these two political mafias, two families which have ruled us for 30 years. They also are above law. So what happens is that when you have powerful above law, uh, the country becomes a banana republic. You can
Mhm.
only, the difference between rich and poor countries, elites, is that the rich countries have rule of law and the poor countries don't have rule of law. The powerful are above law in the poor countries. So you have the ruling elites of the developing world robbing the countries, plundering the money of the poor countries and putting them on offshore accounts and in Western capitals. And the poor countries are getting poorer and the rich countries are getting richer. which is why you have the immigrant problem growing. Because countries that don't have rule of law, you have people, they don't have prosperity. And
Mm-hmm.
so people move to other countries. So same is the problem with Pakistan, and I failed because the army, when you talk about the army, you actually talk about the army chief. He's all in all. He takes the decisions because, uh, it's not a democracy in the army. So he did not want me to bring the powerful under the law. That's it. I couldn't. I failed.
And what makes you think that you could succeed if you ever get re-elected?
Well, because when my previous government was a very weak government, I had a coalition government with a very small majority. And in a parliamentary system, if you have a coalition government with a small majority, it's just impossible to take tough decisions and do reforms, and especially bringing the powerful mafias under the law, because it's very easy for them to destabilize your government. And
Mm-hmm.
in this case, because they joined together with the army chief, that's it. You know, in the end, despite one of the best performances in terms of the economy and in terms of dealing with COVID-19 crisis, we had one of the best performances anywhere. And despite that, the government was pulled down.
Mm-hmm. As far as your record is concerned, the record of your government, there was also heavy criticism abroad, not only abroad, but also abroad from independent media, or also NGOs like Human Rights Watch, who said that there were media shut down under your government, and there were journal charged with state because of statements they made on social media and so on. Could you defend your own record?
Well, look, all you have to do is do a comparison in 3.5 years of my government, the treatment of media, and just the last 14 months of what has happened to the media. Today, the media is completely controlled. There's total censorship. I am a politician today whose rating is over 70%. I'm not allowed to be on media. They do not one word of mine is mentioned on media. A total ban. My members of my party cannot even go on media to put a point of view through. So it's completely controlled. But not just that. One of our best investigative journalists first, because he was a critic of the government, he was first, there were several cases against him. Then he had to run away from the country because of life threats. And he was assassinated in Kenya. The guy's name is Arshad Sharif, one of the top journalists. Today, one of now who's first, this guy, Imran Riaz, first he was hounded out. They got him off the TV channels. Then he started his YouTube channel, which is the best, the highest viewership of his channel is on YouTube. He has been abducted for 40 days and no one knows where he is. The judges keep asking to produce him in court, the police, and they say, we don't know where he is. So 4 of our best journalists have left the country. The top journalists also have left the country. So this sort of thing never happened. In our case, there was the top media house was closed. The owner was put in prison of Bold Television. He was tortured, and now they are all the channels are controlled by the government. So this never happened in our time. There were a few instances, and I can tell you that had nothing to do with my government. There were 1 or 2 instances of fake news on social media and using vulgarity. On that, there was some action, but you can't even compare what is happening right now. I mean, ours was a question of fake news or libel laws. And even I was libeled. I went to court. I went to court against libel, and in 3 years, me prime minister didn't get any justice. So, so in our case, there was a free media. There was no interference in the judiciary. It was a independent justice system. So None of the parties faced victimization like we do. All the corruption cases against the parties, 95% of the cases we inherited were from the previous governments, not by us. So you cannot compare what is happening right now, I mean, to the political workers. 10,000 workers in jail. I mean, in their time, there was no political victimization.
You claim that the US played a role in your ousting as a prime minister. I suppose you uphold this.
Slightly modified. I mean, look, the facts, let me just tell you what the facts were. On 7th of May or 6th of March 22, I receive a cipher. Cipher is the coded message from my ambassador in Washington. He sends me a message on 6th, I think 6th or 7th of March. And he had a meeting with the American official, Under Secretary of State of US, Donald Lu. And they have an official meeting. There were note takers on both sides. And he sends a message to me, the Prime Minister, that the American Under Secretary of State is saying that unless I, Imran Khan, the Prime Minister, is removed through a vote of no confidence, there will be consequences for Pakistan. And the next day, the vote of confidence is tabled in the National Assembly. And I produced that cipher, that coded message in the cabinet. I produced it in the National Security Council. There was an official protest from the Pakistan government for the US interfering in our internal affairs. So that's a fact. Now, what happened subsequently, we discovered that it was my army chief who was in connivance, who was working with a lobbyist in the US, a man called Hussain Haqqani, who was paid $30,000 by my government. We didn't know this. And he was actually promoting that Imran Khan was anti-American. And the army chief was pro-America. So that we discovered later on when these facts came out.
And the reason would have been, the reason for the US to oppose you would have been that you were critical of the war on terror and the US being engaged in Afghanistan. But now that this is basically over, I mean, the US military has left Afghanistan. Is there still any major problem between your political view and the US administration?
Look, the problem is, in US, there's a strange thinking, very immature sometimes, that if you're critical of their foreign policy, they believe you're anti-American. And I mean, the war on terror in Pakistan cost us 80,000 people dead. And I opposed it throughout because I kept saying that this was nothing to do with Pakistan. But if we get involved in the war on terror, we had trained the Mujahideen in the 80s against the Soviets in the art of what would later be called terrorism, but then it was guerrilla warfare. CIA poured the money. Pakistan trained these guys like Al-Qaeda. They were trained to fight the Soviets. Now, come 10 years later, when the Soviets had left and 9/11 happens, now we are telling the same guys that now just because the US is in Afghanistan, now it is no longer jihad, it is terrorism. So I kept telling them that this will have severe consequences on Pakistan. So what happened was that those groups we had trained, like Al-Qaeda, they turned against Pakistan. And then on the border belt of Pakistan, what is called the tribal areas of FATA, from where the war was, the Afghan jihad was conducted, amongst them, people turned against Pakistan and started calling themselves TTP, the Pakistan Taliban. They turned against us. So 80,000 Pakistanis died in that. I kept telling them that if we had stayed neutral, we had a much better chance of controlling this. But then the moment we were called collaborators, they declared jihad against us. So we paid a heavy price, over $100 billion lost to the economy. So I think that's one of the reasons, and that obviously that's over now. Second is the Afghan jihad, the Afghanistan-US adventure. I mean, anyone who knows the history of Afghanistan knew it was doomed to fail. because you know if you know the Afghan character, and then they didn't even know what they were there for. What was the objective? What was winning for the US? We never knew what they would call victory. Did they go to liberate the Afghan women? Did they bring democracy in Afghanistan? No one knew. So they were there, and the more collateral damage took place in Afghanistan, the more the Taliban forces grew. So Taliban grew because of collateral damage of drone attacks and of night raids. And so it was always going to end in a disaster.
Mhm.
And I think for being critical about that, I think that's why also they thought I was anti-American, which I wasn't. And
Mhm.
I'm not. I don't feel, I think US, Pakistan should always have good relationship with the US.
Do you consider yourself a pro-Western politician?
No, I'm basically a nationalist. I mean, my main thing is that, a prime minister, when he's elected, his main responsibility becomes his people. And in my case, my main responsibility were 100 million Pakistanis who were vulnerable, who are either below the poverty line or just above it. And so my main concern was them, and therefore, uh, to help my country get people out of poverty, you had to have peace. So these two, Afghan Jihad and the Afghan, the war on terror, I mean, they set us back. We suffered because of that. We levels of poverty went up, our economy went down. I mean, in this time, India went ahead of us, and then Bangladesh even overtook us.
Mhm.
Right up till the 90s, Pakistan economically was ahead of all the other countries in the subcontinent. But after the war on terror, we were overtaken by everyone. So
Mhm.
right now, Pakistan is suffering the worst ever economic situation in our history, and growing poverty. So as someone, if I was ever a prime minister, my priority again would become my people, just like any other country.
Of course, but if I may ask you a very blunt question, I mean, at the moment, um, every country is being asked to decide whether it joins the pro-Western coalition against Russia or not. Where would you stand on this?
Well, I would stand exactly where India is. I mean, India is a part of the US coalition, the Quad strategic alliance of the US. The Indian Prime Minister has just gone to the US, and he's signed up, a huge number of contracts of cooperation, of nuclear, of technology, and so on. And yet he's bought the most amount of oil from Russia at a very cheap rate. So, uh, and he's trading with China. I mean, China is one of the biggest trading partners of India. So, and yet it is so that's how it should be. I don't think countries like us have the luxury of joining blocs
Mm.
when we have over 100 million people hovering around poverty. Our job should be really how do we get people out of poverty? Because we have a fast growing population. We are 250 million people. Our country now stands on the verge of economic collapse. I mean, should our priority be to save this country, or should it be to be part of other people's conflicts when we can't afford to?
Mm. I understand. It's not only economic collapse, but now it's also in a politically very, very dangerous situation, as you probably agree. But, what do you think? What are the chances that, I mean, we know Pakistan from afar. There was the lawyers' movement. There is an amount of civil society. There is a Supreme Court. I mean, there are checks and balances, and still there's always the military in power, and it's very hard to decipher whether this is on the way to a democracy or moving away from democracy. It's still what we call a hybrid regime. What do you think? Where will it go now?
Well, look, Pakistan's democratic movement has gradually evolved. I mean, we would have democracy, then we would have military dictatorship. That would last for a year, then we would again try with democracy. That would fail, we would go back to military dictatorship. So three times we've had military dictators, and then we've had tried to experiment with democracy, and we've not been very, sadly, I mean, the democratic the governments were not very effective. So people would go, when military would come back, people would sort of distribute sweets. People would celebrate. But this is the first time, when they removed my government in 2000, last year in April, first time when the government was removed, people came out in the streets to protest about it. And what has happened is unique in our history. And I think it's the evolution of a democratic process too. Because people now, although we have undeclared martial law in Pakistan right now, I mean, we have all civil liberties, the Supreme Court, the judiciary, they've they've all been made impotent because whatever is the military establishment, whatever it decides happens in Pakistan. So, the crackdown on my party has been, by the military establishment. The media is controlled today. Not a word of mine can be mentioned on media. It's because of the power of the military establishment. So we have gone all the way back now. All the evolution, you're talking about the lawyers' movement. I was put in jail in that lawyers' movement against General Musharraf for independent justice system. So that our judiciary was by and large getting independent. And now all that has, been rolled back. So we really have an undeclared martial law in Pakistan now.
Mm. Now, my last question is, you've been put into prison now many times. You live in fear of being arrested again. There are 170 charges against you. You've survived an assassination attempt. Do you ever regret having gone into politics?
No, never. I never have regretted. I always, when I started 27 years back, uh, I was the biggest name in this country. I had everything. I didn't need politics for anything. But I realized when as a teenager, I went to England to study first and then to play professional cricket. I used to play there. I realized that, unless we have rule of law, we have no future, because countries that don't have rule of law, the powerful, it's the law of the jungle, the powerful then control the resources. So Pakistan is like most of the developing world. The resources have been captured by the powerful and they're above law. And most of them take their money out of the country. So we are like in the developing world, we are just like what is happening in the other poorer countries which don't have rule of law, which are being looted, plundered by the ruling elites because they take the money out. So that's what's happening in Pakistan. So when I started 27 years ago, I knew I would be up against these mafias, who are above law and who have elite capture, we call it, who've captured the resources of this country. The rich get richer and poor get poorer. Even the loans we get from IMF benefit the top few people. It doesn't go down to. So that's how I started my movement for justice, meaning movement for rule of law. And when you try to bring rule of law, you are going to be up against the mafias. So I already knew I would be risking my life when I take on these powerful people. And so, one assassination attempt, 3rd of November, second assassination attempt on the 18th of March, which I survived, which, I survived because I got out in time. Otherwise, they were going to kill me. And then, I have 170 plus cases. I expect to be put in jail this week, actually. I think that this coming week, they will put me in jail because they want to keep me inside until the elections. And they feel that if I'm in jail, then I won't be able to, my party won't be able to compete in the elections. Plus, there's a crackdown on my party. So I expect this. But I also feel that never in this country has it happened that the people have all stood on one side and these 12 parties and the establishment on the other side. It's never happened before. Normally, the public was divided. This time, and this is why they are so scared, This is why this crackdown has taken place. This is why these cases against me. This is why they're desperate to jail me. This is why they're desperate to kill me. Because it's never happened that the public actually has stood on one side against the military establishment and their stooges. So answer to your question, yes. Jail, yes. Possible assassination attempt, yes. But on the other hand, if we win, we will actually win genuine democracy in Pakistan for the first time. We will actually be able to what you call the hybrid system, which doesn't work because when you split responsibility and authority, no management system works like that. So we will actually be able to, if we win, we will actually give Pakistan hope for a genuine democracy, and that brings prosperity.
Sure. Thank you very much.